So you play a driving instructor called Darwan, and he's quite a complex character. What drew you to the role?
So I spent really the first, I would say, formative years of my career, mostly in Stratford-upon-Avon, and entirely working on Shakespeare's work. And you do, through that work, you have to, because it was written over 400 years ago, of course, to present it to a modern audience. You don't change the words, but you do find that amazing commonality and relevance to today that was written so exquisitely 400 years ago. So when I look at a script and a role that's being offered to me, I look for that really true, honest perception of genuine patterns of human behavior. And sometimes the best of fiction becomes the worst of fiction because it strays into areas that are simply not human. People don't do that. But it'd be good for the screenplay if we did it in this movie, but no, people don't do that. And then you lose your audience because the whole process of empathy, which is why films and theatre and any kind of literary or dramatic exercise is so good for us, because it trains our empathy, keeps our empathy alive, especially as we're getting more and more isolated now. So I look for those indelible ancient patterns, which I found in this film.
Yeah.
I think he's an ancient soul. This film could have been set, wow, if he were doing something else, obviously not a driving instructor, could have been set 1,000 years ago. A man banished from his homeland meets a woman banished from her home. They're both banished.
Yeah. Obviously, there's been much debate recently about the whitewashing of Hollywood. Do you think there should be more colorblind casting, or do you believe that's just tokenism?
Oh gosh, I mean, surely any industry, any craft that purports to sell things to an audience must be sensitive to the audience and to the environment and the culture from which that audience comes. So as soon as there is a demand in the audience for the immense variety that is life, especially cosmopolitan life now, of course, your filmmakers will step up to the plate. But I believe it has to be driven from audience demand. I don't believe I don't think it's the other way around. Could be, but the demand has to be there. There has to be an appetite to see films that come from, just as I was saying a minute ago, the real patterns of human behavior, the real patterns of our existence, so that we could look forward to, and there may be an appetite for films that draw upon our wonderful pool of different types, shapes, sizes, sexes, everything.
Do you think there is a fear with such little portrayal of South Asians in American film that often stereotypes are relied upon?
I find that if you, going back to Shakespeare, when I read a script and if I find underneath the character the ancient myth, then I will play that character. I think that, for example, Darwan Singh is the ancient ferryman who ferries you across the river. You step onto his boat on one bank, you step off on another, and by the time you cross that river, my goodness, you've learned something. He may not even speak. He may point to the sky and say a few words, but you will take that journey with you forever. It will shape your life. Now, once you have films not made by a single guiding intelligence, but made by a committee who are desperate to preserve their parking space outside the studio, not to produce a great film, you will not have he or she who is committed to, connected to the ancient stories that are completely alive and relevant today. As I said, this film could take place 1,000 years ago. The same dilemmas would exist, the same challenges would exist. The same barriers would have to come down. So if you see a stereotype on the screen, that's a bad filmmaker. Simple as that.
Now, the film has, it depicts issues to do with racism and Islamophobia in New York, which is often not something that is explored in Hollywood, for example.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it that we see things like this in today's climate?
You know, the extraordinary thing about filming in Queens, where many Sikhs live, is that even after a Sikh temple was invaded and people were shot at, mistaken for Taliban, you could not have two people more polar opposite. They invited us into their temple. That immediately is an enormous gesture which will redress the balance of the stereotype, because we were in a real temple. We were with real Sikhs, playing the tabla, singing, playing the lovely accordion. So once, the closer you get to genuine patterns of human behavior, the more healing storytelling will be.
Mm-hmm. And the protagonists are from two very distinct worlds. What draws them to each other?
An accident draws them together. She, as a literary critic, the top of her game in New York, which is basically the capital of publishing, she leaves a manuscript when she's in great distress in the back of his cab, sobbing and running back into her home, which has been deserted by her husband. And a few hours later, clocking off from work in the morning, he finds the manuscript in the back of his cab, and being a gentleman and a Sikh, he returns the manuscript to her, and so develops a journey together.